Just two preliminary remarks. I had the honor of talking about this book and the entire relationship Austria-Hungary, Central Europe, a couple of months ago at the London School of Economics, and it wasn't such an informal gathering as here, but of course it was very, very interesting. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Berlin at a discussion at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in the morning, Sunday morning at 10:30, and there was no wine, but people were having breakfast, or perhaps a glass of, thank you, perhaps a glass of sect or glass of orange juice, and they were listening, and there were quite interesting questions. But this is a new venue, and I am most impressed that people are even standing to listening to a foreign accent talking about countries we know nothing, as Chamberlain said in 1939. But this is not the case, of course, in Vienna. I have written, as Dadis said, several books in English and in German, Hungarian being a language of luxury, as you know. And so this last book is here, and one is always confronted with a basic dilemma. If I really say everything what is in this book, no one will ever buy it. So my task as a journalist and an author is to make myself and the book interesting, so that people are curious what is happening. When I published the German edition, a very respected colleague in a very respected paper, we are not doing Schleiferbuch, so I'm not mentioning the name of the paper, wrote that, well, this is a very interesting book, what I wrote about Viktor Orban, but really a country of 10 million people is really threatening the cohesion of the EU, or even a kind of competitor, a rival to Angela Merkel. So he hinted that it is a wild exaggeration. Unfortunately, it wasn't. The book is interesting, if I may say so, for three reasons. Number one, it's a human story of someone very young became very famous by appearing on the stage at the right time when the change of regime came 1989 in Hungary on the Hero Square, a young man, bearded, looked unkept to civilized middle-class people who were standing there. They all wished the change of the regime, and he gave a speech which lasted 6 minutes and 20 seconds. His name was Viktor Orban, and he called for the negotiations about the withdrawal of Russian troops and for a democracy. Since then, he has been a politician. He lost 3 elections, won 2, and when he lost this 3rd election, he said, we only have to win once, but then really big. And so he took really care that he will never be defeated again. When our former president, Heinz Fischer, was in Budapest a year ago, or a year and a half ago, he talked to Mr. Orban and very discreetly hinted that perhaps not everything is perfect in Hungary as far as democracy and constitutional safeguards are concerned. And Orban said, you don't have to explain to me. I lost more elections than anyone else here. I lost 3 elections. That's true. But then he won the first elections, 2010, got a 2/3 majority, totally refurbished, refashioned the country. And he became then actually not only prime minister, but according to a general consensus, there is no other prime minister or president, political leader in the European Union or in the democratic world who has the power as he has. And that's a fantastic story, how someone started out left of the center with his friends. Together with these friends, he managed to secure the commanding position, the commanding heights in the country's apparatus, and totally built up his power and became it's very often he called conservative. He's not really a conservative. He is a populist, nationalist, now also Christian nationalist. 24 years ago, he was still not a very religious man, didn't even baptize his first two children, but then he changed, he realized religion in church has a great power in Central Europe, and particularly also in Hungary. But the point is, it's an incredibly interesting human story how someone changes. That's number one. Number two, how a man or a politician has the ability to not only to seize power, but make it possible that no one else can seize power, but not through open dictatorship. In a way, he is much more subtle than Putin or Erdogan. There is a semblance of democracy. There are newspapers, very small circulation. There is one radio. There are internet portals, websites, and you can demonstrate. In Hungary, people will not be, or have been so far, put in jail, let alone beaten up or killed. And number three, he managed to recognize a major chance, a political situation. It is rare that people have this kind of, in German you say, Fingerspitzengefühl, a feel for the moment. And that was in 2015. 2015, I was with my wife on the way to Budapest. We were attending a birthday celebration for a very, very talented Hungarian painter who is also a very, very courageous Democrat and fighter against the dismantling of democracy. And on the way, I got a phone call from the ORF. I used to be editor-in-chief for Eastern Europe, and after that, I was running the equivalent of Bush House in England, the foreign language services of the ORF. In the meantime, they liquidated it, unfortunately. And as you may have noticed, and on the way, I got a phone call. Could I give an interview for the ZIP 2, the major program at 10 o'clock, about the refugee situation. It was in those days when there were thousands of refugees in Hungary, all camping at the Ostbahnhof at the Eastern Railway Station. I said, okay, and then there was no studio in Budapest. The two correspondents were traveling somewhere in the country, so I went there, and I met, on the way when we were driving to Budapest, the first groups of Syrian and other, primarily Syrian refugees who were going on foot towards the Austrian border. And I did a commentary, I was asked, interviewed, and then I described this book also, some of the circumstances under which this happened. And that was the start. And he, Viktor Orban, was in Paris when there was the terrorist attack against the Hebdo in Paris 2 years ago, January, and already then he gave an interview in which he said quite clearly to a Hungarian news agent, to the Hungarian news agency, that migrants, refugees are a terrible threat. Later he said they are all, everyone is a potential terrorist. We know that most of the terror actions were committed in London, Paris, or Germany were about 80% by people who were living there, or were unfortunately, who who were even the children of people who lived there. But anyhow, and he started a campaign, not only erecting a barrier, but a total campaign against any kind of, accepting any kind of migrants or refugees. And this was interesting for three reasons. Number one, Hungary had no Muslims or no foreign laborers. Hungary was under communist dictatorship until 1989. It's total contrast to Vienna or to Berlin. So they haven't seen them, and they haven't been threatened by the influx of foreigners or rivals for the jobs, etc. And there was a tradition of deeply rooted nationalism too, like in other countries in Central Europe. And he recognized this, and the fear became then the pillar of building up even more strongly his apparatus and his rule. And unfortunately, 70%, 75% of the Hungarians asked at a poll, opinion poll said they agreed. Even writers who didn't agree with him at all, some of them said they support this. And this consolidated his leadership. Now I mentioned Central Europe. There is a similar situation also in Slovakia, in the Czech Republic, in Romania, and in Poland, that they haven't had foreign labor or migrants. And the other third feature, which is interesting, that these countries were providing the reservoir of labor and brilliant scientists for the whole world. Even now, Hungary, 500,000 young people emigrated from Hungary. And from Bulgaria, almost 1 million. From Poland, you know all these stories. But at the same time, they didn't want to let anyone in. And finally, the feature which upset very much the Western European members of the European Union